Welcome to the Law School Toolbox Podcast. Today we're talking with ex-recruiter Sadie Jones about how not to be a jerk at work. Your Law School Toolbox hosts are Alison Monahan and Lee Burgess. That's me. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. Alison also runs the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review on iTunes. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started. Welcome back. Today we are talking about how not to be a jerk in your law firm office environment with our special guest, Sadie Jones, who's a former BigLaw recruiter. Hi, Sadie. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
Yeah. So it kind of seems like a funny thing to talk about, and I was trying to come up with a title for this episode, and that's pretty much as good as it got. But lawyers do have a terrible reputation when it comes to being nice and considerate in the office, both to people they work with and also people outside of the office. Lawyers often have reputations of being jerks to other lawyers. Is this something you saw in your BigLaw life?
I have to say it is. And some of it just seems like common sense stuff. And I would be surprised at some of the behavior. I think that probably the reason is because people are stressed out. Mm-hmm. And I think that they're taking things out on people. They're spending most of their time with people at work and in the office. And I think sometimes they act differently than they would at home or to other people. I think that you should just be mindful when you're in the office that these are your colleagues. Some of them are your friends. They're people that work for you. They're your bosses. And they, are seeing your behavior, and it all kind of, is something that they're taking in.
Yeah, it's so hard because I've worked in two kind of corporate environments that are similar to each other. So before law school, I was a consultant at Accenture, and then after law school, I had a big firm job. And these work environments are somewhat similar. You often have folks who are working crazy hours. At Accenture, we also traveled together, which totally changed the work environment as well. And these folks were basically the people we spent all of our time with. And it can be hard to remember that you have a professional relationship when you are spending most of your social outings together, if you're traveling together for work. I know folks talk about being on trial teams where you could be relocated for a long period of time. So you want to be nice and kind to these folks for many reasons, but one is they become a large part of your life, and they're meaningful relationships. You have to balance that with the requirements to stay professional because those relationships still have boundaries because they are professional relationships.
And I think you should keep in mind, because there's always a hierarchy in law firms, do people work for you? Mm-hmm. Do you work for other people? Even if you're friends with them. So I think even if you're friends with, let's say, a junior associate and you're more senior, they can take what you're saying and think that it's, has more meaning than it might.
That's a good point.
So I would always keep that in mind, or even your secretary, legal assistant, something like that.
Yeah. All right, well, let's dive into the beginning of this process, this entry into the law firm world, which is really the interview process. So I'm sure that you saw some jerk-like behaviors during the interview process. But
absolutely.
But a few that I have seen is this idea of being too pushy. There's that fine line between confidence and wanting the job, but then, crossing over to pushy, maybe even slightly annoying. So where do you think that line is, or what do folks need to consider in that?
Well, I think I would see it a lot of times with follow-up because they hadn't heard back, or even trying to get an interview in the first place, let's say at a hospitality suite.
Yeah.
So I think you want to express your interest. You want to make sure that's clear. You really like this firm. And if you haven't heard back, I think, an email, a phone call, a follow-up is fine. I think leave it there. If let's say 2 or 3 weeks go by, maybe another email.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't be following up very often. They probably are busy. They haven't forgotten about you. They're probably trying to figure things out. So I think once you feel confident that you've expressed your interest, just back off.
I think that's such a good point. And I really didn't fully appreciate this until owning my own company and going through hiring is this idea that sometimes hiring is not the only thing you have going on, and you're trying to do hiring and you're trying to stay on top of resumes. You're trying to get back to people quickly because you know that people are considering, next choices in their life. But sometimes, fire drills happen or other things come up, and then you find yourself dropping the ball. And I now appreciate that can happen really unintentionally. So it's not that you're not thinking about the hiring process, that you're not trying to move it forward, but everybody's super busy. And I think keeping that idea that it's probably not about you, it's more about whatever they have going on, can help you just moderate your excitement about getting more information, I guess.
Absolutely. And I also think the part of it that you don't really know is who else is involved in the process.
Right.
You know the person you're dealing with. You don't know that, they're waiting to hear back from a hiring partner about something. Or, they have another candidate and they're trying to interview them and compare you. When people don't get jobs, I always say, you don't know what the other person's qualifications were, and maybe they were a better fit, and it's kind of the unknown, and it can be hard for people.
Yeah.
So I think the advice is it's not usually about you.
Right.
Even though for you, this job might be the most important thing going on right
which
now.
you totally get, but it is really hard. Hiring is a lot harder than I thought it was until I ended up doing it, I guess.
Exactly. It's just a lot of different things to balance.
Yeah, and you're often balancing multiple people's schedules. I think that is something that I didn't fully realize until I worked in a busy office environment. Even if you've already done all your interviewing, sometimes they're just somebody's trying to get on a more important, busier person's schedule to even talk to them about your interview. So it's
exactly,
so can be even part of it. It's not about you. It's literally trying to get a half hour in front of somebody who's traveling or busy or cancels meetings all the time. And so it's just something to keep in mind and make sure that, in your responses or your follow-ups, that you're just respectful, that you appreciate that they have a lot going on, but you're just checking in and you're still excited about the opportunity.
Because I do think this is also a situation where you can become an issue for yourself if you're following up too much. Because maybe they're not sure, or maybe they are trying to do that. It could end up making you look bad and you lose the opportunity because of your behavior after. So just keep that in mind. Yeah,
that's a good point. But we still like a good thank you note, right? Thank you notes are always welcome.
Absolutely. And I would say, be careful. I would read it over a few times. I think people don't always think to proof thank you notes.
Oh, yeah.
Because that is also something that can be a ding. I know we almost passed on someone because her thank you note was so poorly written.
Oh, interesting.
And I don't really know what happened.
Double check the spelling of people's names. That is also a big one. Yes, especially we have a company where we have Alison with one L. So if you were writing a thank you note to Alison and I, you would want to make sure that her name had one L in it. And don't spell my name, Leigh. Because
I was just going to say Lee can probably be spelled a few different ways.
Exactly. But it's important to double check, because if you're that interested in the job, you have Googled and confirmed how to spell my name.
I also think that's something that's important in the whole interviewing process is to send thank yous to everyone that you talk to. Even if you're doing a mock interview or a courtesy interview, or somebody has coffee with you, follow up. Tell them you appreciate their time. If they're just doing you a favor, I think really think about everyone you deal with, not just the people in the office who you're directly, getting a job with.
Yeah, that's a really good piece of advice. Other things not to comment on, going back to this idea of Googling people to make sure you know who they are. I am not a huge fan when I get emails or I get on a call with somebody and they say something like, "Oh, I didn't expect you to be a woman," which I realize I have a gender ambiguous name and I get that. But, Google me. Just Google me before a phone call. If you're talking about how interested you are in my business and how impressed you are by the work that I do, that means that you've probably seen my face, which is all over my website, or you have listened to the podcast, which I realize that you can't always tell gender from a voice, but I think we've talked about the fact that, we're women mostly on this podcast. But it kind of can dilute your message, right? Because if I get an email from someone who says he's so excited, it's oftentimes a man, but yes, it's only happened to me from men. I'll be honest, who talks about how surprised he is that I'm a woman. Then it's clear to me that you haven't invested literally the 2 seconds on your phone before you sent the email to like Google my name. If you Google my name, like I come up and there's like a photographer or musician or something in Atlanta who I recognize as a gentleman. But we're very different people. I'm sure you can figure it out.
I'm surprised anyone would make that comment regardless.
Yeah. I mean, I got it when I was interviewing for jobs when I was much younger, and that was pre-Google. Yeah. People would get my resume and then they would be surprised when I walked in the door, which was always a unique moment. You're like, I'm not exactly sure how to take that. Good surprise, bad surprise, I don't know.
And I agree that just doing some basic background info on anyone you're going to talk to is important. Like, you should never walk into a law firm interview and not know like what practice areas they have, or with the person, unless they sprung it on you last minute,
right?
When there was a change you didn't know. You should know, what they've done. Are there any recent big cases in the news? There's no excuse for not doing a little bit of research.
Yeah. If you want the job that badly, show them you want the job.
Exactly.
Now, the next thing I think to watch out is to not be too cocky in the interview. Confidence and cockiness, fine line to not cross over.
Absolutely. And I think it is one of those things you sort of know it when you see it.
Yeah.
On our side of things, where somebody has crossed that line.
Mm-hmm. I did have someone once try to accept a job that I hadn't offered yet. That was an interesting interview moment. I was like, well, I'm really glad you're so interested in this position, but we have a few more steps to go in this interview process. So that was interesting. So you do just have to make sure that the way that you're communicating your excitement is humbly, I guess.
Absolutely. And I think along those lines, I have seen people say things like, when I'm a summer associate or when I work here. Mm-hmm. I would always be careful to say, if.
Right. Yeah.
Keep it, you don't know that you're gonna get this,
right.
This position. And I think that just goes along with just being respectful and not asking for too much, and not, we had some people who, the NALP guidelines say that you get X, Y, or Z, covered in your expenses. And I think I have people who kind of go beyond that and ask for other things, mm-hmm. or, try to charge things to the firm that they're not allowed to, even on hotel bills, like crazy amounts of room service, all that kind of stuff. I feel like that all goes with like, shouldn't you want me, and pay for all this and whatnot. So I think you always just want to keep in mind, I would say like kind of fly a little under the radar.
Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean that you can't be confident about your own qualifications. I mean, I would say that in some interviews, I was very confident about previous experience. If they challenged me on something to try and turn something. I remember I was in one interview, as an example, where they were trying to bait me into a dialogue about why I had changed jobs a few times mm-hmm. since college. And it was like a litigation firm. So they were like baiting me in kind of this, like a rude way. And they had, the hiring room was a whole panel of people in a U shape. And then they sat you in a seat at the end. I mean, it was all very like bizarrely constructed to make you feel weak. And, in an environment like that, I was always very confident in my answers. And so I think you don't want to say, oh, well, I need to play down my accomplishments. I think it's more just like you are accomplished, but you are also humble to have this opportunity. This is kind of like those things together.
And I think some of it depends on your experience level too. Like I had somebody recently ask me who had just finished his first year of practice. He was interviewing, what should I talk about? And I said, I feel like there's a fine line between, I've worked on this year, I've learned things, but I realize I'm a junior associate.
Right.
And I have a lot to learn, and I don't think that makes you look bad.
No.
So I think kind of don't overplay like what were your role on things, just be honest.
Yeah. I think being honest is another really good point through your entire mm-hmm. career, is not lying about your accomplishments or taking credit for other people's things. Definitely a good policy to have. All right. So now you've made... go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, you also don't want to get in over your head. If
True.
you say that you're able to do something and then they put you in front of it, like you're going to be stuck.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So now you're a summer associate or a young associate and you're now, the bottom of the food chain in the law firm. I think there are a few different ways that you can fall into some pitfalls at work. And one is often, especially with folks who don't have a lot of work experience, is how they interact with support staff, with legal assistants, with receptionists, with paralegals, all of which who might know a lot more about the practice of law at that law firm than you do. Because you just got there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so you really want to make sure that you're coming off as respectful of their experience. And oftentimes you want to make friends with them because they can really help you. There were many times when I was a young associate that I went up to my legal assistant and was like, hi, I was given this assignment to do this, and I have no idea what I'm actually supposed to do. As far as like creating this document. So is that something that you help me with? And she's like, if you write the text, I will finish it. I'm like, you're amazing. Thank you. Because I didn't know the next part. I needed that. And so being nice to support staff, bonding with them, they are likely also going to help you in your career. If you feel like you're all in the same team. So a cup of coffee with support staff can go a long way. A nice little trinket around the holidays for folks that you work with can also be really nice. But you do want to make sure that you are interacting with the staff that work at that firm in a positive way, because, they also oftentimes have the ears of the partners and the folks that have been there a long time. And you want them saying nice things about you and how great you are to work with, not the alternative.
Absolutely. And I think some of the more senior partners would be upset to find out that, a new associate or a new summer associate was not treating like a secretary right.
Yes.
Or a legal assistant. And that really could hurt you.
Yeah. And
I think people aren't aware of that the people who have been there a long time know who's important and who's going to help you.
Yeah.
So I think, just come in humbly. And a lot of the legal assistants maybe have been doing this for 20 or 30 years, and they know just as much as a junior associate about how to do some of these tasks.
Yeah.
And they might even have more information, about how to get something done. And I think the other thing is you may be working late with these people. You're going to be spending a lot of time together.
Yeah.
Like you don't want to be the person that people are talking about.
No. And they do talk to each other, because I actually also had support staff tell me about like something nice they said about me, which was very sweet. But then you kind of have that moment of like, oh, so you all were talking about us. We were all actually, I think we were summers, but clearly they were all just chatting about the summers. And
yeah. And I know that, at least at one of the firms I worked at, we would solicit feedback just generally about summer associates before offers at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Not all firms do that, but we really did take it into account. And I did have people tell me negative things, and some things we wouldn't have known.
Yeah.
So I think keep that in mind. Like everyone there is, watching you, and this is a job interview.
It is.
Summer associate.
And you have to think about, a lot of things that you do and the persona that you're putting together. So for instance, it's possible that I have a bit of a potty mouth most of my life, except around my kid. I really try and dial it back. So it's not as bad as it used to be. But like at work, you want to choose your words carefully, because some language can be offensive to those at work. And especially when you're a summer, you want to maybe dial it back, because unless you have a partner that is dropping F-bombs all over the place, that could be offensive, and that could something that could be shared, with folks that could get back to the hiring committee, because they might be concerned that you might do something offensive to a client. So, as much as I enjoy a good F-bomb here and there, I think it might be something you want to really temper at the office until you figure out, the lay of the land, so to speak.
That's what I was going to say. Once you kind of get to know people and you see like different personalities and what's okay with this person or that person, you might get a little more comfortable. But I think absolutely at the beginning, you don't want to stand out for things like that.
Yeah. You also want to be nice to your other associates or summer associates, even if you feel like you're in direct competition. Because it gets weird if people feel like someone's talking behind their back, or like you mentioned, taking credit for work that wasn't theirs, or is trying to be the most impressive over somebody else. not good. You want to be the team player. I don't think that kind of competition is going to get rewarded.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I know not all firms do this, but sometimes we would have group projects. It's hard to evaluate a group project, which is why we didn't do it. But occasionally we would. And I think if you're in that situation, really think about, what am I contributing? Am I doing half the work?
Right.
Make sure you're not slacking off in a situation like that.
Yeah.
And I also think ultimately you're not really in competition against the other people. Most firms, unless they tell you at the beginning there's like X number of offers, which is pretty unusual these days, I would say like everyone starts with an offer. You can lose it.
Yeah.
So it's not like, that person getting an offer hurts you.
That's
I think
true.
Focus, keep your eyes on your own paper.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah, there's enough to worry about your own performance, let alone trying to worry about anybody else's performance.
Yeah.
Speaking of performances, please do not make your performance at the social events for the firm as a summer or a young associate things that are also discussed by everyone at the firm, which means
Absolutely.
You got to watch the drinking. Drinking is a really tough one. And I think you have to know a lot about yourself and how you handle alcohol to make sure that you're able to navigate drinking at social work functions in a positive way.
I had someone say you really shouldn't have more than 2 drinks at a work event, especially when you're a summer associate. And I think that is a pretty good rule.
Isn't that like really a matchmaker rule too? That like you're not supposed to have more than 2 drinks on a first date?
I might have heard of that there also, like Millionaire Matchmaker.
Yeah, not that we spend a lot of time watching Bravo or something.
I think it's a good rule because, you know what, I get it. It's free alcohol. And sometimes you're friends with people and you're having a good time. You know what? Do it later. Like, do it another time.
Yeah.
You don't need to do it there.
Yeah.
The other advice I have is that a lot of these events you can bring a guest or a date.
Oh.
Be careful of them also.
True.
Because they're there too, and I can tell you that I had somebody's date once tell me that they didn't really want to work at the firm.
Oh, brutal.
And they shared that with me without me soliciting the information. And it really was an issue because, this person had drank too much, and I think didn't realize that I was really part of, this process of hiring. Think about who you're bringing, their behavior, things they're saying. Remind them that this is your potential employer, or it might be a Christmas party when you're an associate. So that person is a reflection on you.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good point. And you can still have a lot of fun without getting sloshed. So just save it for the after party without the rest of your work peers.
Exactly.
But I know as a summer, it can get really hard and you're going to a lot of events. And a lot of those events can really be about alcohol. So it can be hard to moderate. But I think for almost all of us, it's a good idea to just set parameters. I find it really easy to just like set rules for yourself. I like this idea. It's like just have 2 drinks, or if you're a big drinker, just have 3 drinks. Whatever is your like limit of where you like think before you speak. You don't say silly things. I think that should be where your line is drawn, and and then you can use other times to party and have a good time.
Well, and I think, these social events are important. So I definitely suggest that you go to all of them or as many as you possibly can, because it is their chance to kind of get to know you as a person. Yeah. Which is nice, but you don't want their impression to be, she drinks too much.
Right. She drinks too much and says inappropriate things.
Yeah, exactly. She doesn't really want to work here.
Right. I hadn't thought about the significant others saying something inappropriate, but now
it's happened a lot.
Yeah, actually. I bet it could.
Yeah.
Actually, and I was at a work event for another friend who he doesn't practice law. He's an investment banker, hedge fund person. And I was in Manhattan at something else, and they invited me to this thing that was at the firm because it was overlooking Central Park. And they're just like, come over, eat some free food, have a couple glasses of wine. And I'm talking to his wife, and we're just chatting because we're friends back from San Francisco. And I'm like, oh, so you guys were talking about moving back. Like, are you planning on moving back? And then she literally was like, you realize we're at my husband's work function. I cannot talk about this right now. And I was like, oh, I'm such a jerk. Like, I'm so sorry. But it didn't even dawn on me because you're just like having a glass of wine, looking out over Central Park. And it wasn't my work function,
Yeah.
And I'm like, whoops, party fell. And that was probably glass of wine number 1. So just throwing that out there.
So maybe that's your limit.
Maybe. Oh, yeah. I think another thing that people often forget, especially when they feel like they're on this kind of interview, which could be the summer associate time or even as a young associate, is that it's not always about what you say. It's also about kind of listening to other people and, and not just being the person who talks about themselves all the time. I think that you can come off as a jerk if you do that.
Yes. And I do think, it's a stereotype, but I've noticed that lawyers sometimes can spend a lot of time kind of talking about themselves. And especially if you're used to doing a lot of interviews and having to give your story, I think, over and over again. But I think people really do appreciate when you ask questions and really listen to the answer. Like people notice that.
Yeah.
Oh, she's interested,
Right. Not checking your phone, looking at somebody. I have a friend who's the most incredible listener ever. She currently has been working as a chaplain in a hospital, doing like spiritual guidance for people in crisis, which is amazing work. But even before she was doing that work, when you go out to dinner with her, I feel like I'm the only person she's talking to like in the world. It's amazing. Yeah. And I'm like, if we should all be so focused. She's just one of these people that is right there. And you don't necessarily have to be that intensely focused, but it does make you as the talker feel so kind of warm and connected when somebody is really paying attention to what you're talking about.
Yeah. And I think the other thing people sometimes do is kind of someone tells a story and then you try to like tell a story that either chops it or is like your thing.
Yeah.
Keep it about them if they're talking.
That's true.
I think it's human nature that we do that.
Yeah.
The other thing is the phone. People, it's just like the way it is right now. But be really careful when you're a summer associate, a young associate, you're in a training. Don't keep your phone on the desk. You're getting an assignment from someone. Mm-hmm. I had someone actually who was let go from a job because that was like one of the issues, that he was, on his phone literally getting an assignment from a partner.
Wow. Yeah, that's bad.
Yeah. It wasn't the only reason, but, I think people notice that stuff that builds up, like you're not listening to me.
Yeah. It's interesting. I recently got this phone case for my phone that has one of the flaps that protects from radiation, because I'm kind of like freaked out about that. But it's one that's like, it's got a cover, like a flap on it. And what was shocking to me is when I like got this cover and I couldn't see my phone all the time because it was like behind this cover. I touched it less. It was so bizarre. And I just realized how like doing something simple, like putting it in a bag or like, like covering it up, it could still be there. If, somebody's ringing because there's an emergency, you will still be reached, but you're not just constantly touching it all the time. It was really such a small thing that made a big difference. So maybe get a new phone case. It could change your life. Who knows?
We're all a little addicted.
I think we are.
We can all. Also, no one's that important. They need to be checking their email like every 5 minutes.
That is true. That is absolutely true. All right. What about work email and like Messenger at the office? I feel like this can be a place where a lot of pitfalls can happen.
Yes. I would be careful.
Yeah.
So this is what I think, that most likely no one is checking your emails and no one is checking your Messenger and no one ever will. Right?
Right.
But there are situations where something could come up where they will go back and check all your emails. Like there's an issue.
Right.
And they have the right to do that. So I think, the best rule is just don't use it for personal stuff. Don't use it for gossiping. I think it's easy to do that, especially with Messenger, if that's what you're on.
Yeah.
You can do it with your personal, you can do it in another form.
Text.
I think keep that off of your
WhatsApp
stuff because GChat, something else. But I think that you have to keep in mind that legally they can check it at some time. And do you really want someone going through your emails and finding, bad things in there, negative things about other people at the office, things that are inappropriate? It's just a good rule to keep it separate.
And really what drives this home is the first time you do a document review of somebody's email, because I remember sitting in my first doc review and you're reading emails that somebody wrote to the person they were having an affair with. You're reading emails about people searching for their homes, like to get a new home. You're reading discussions between spouses about things, all on work email that was discoverable in a case, and that a team of attorneys has to go through and, decide what is relevant. And granted, like, that stuff is going to be combed through by the lawyers. It's not going to, go to the opposite side if it's not relevant. But the problem is, like, it really dawned on me, like, oh my gosh, what if, like, my work computer, my work email got discoverable for something, and then everyone's going to read every single thing that I wrote, or some people are going to read it. And I actually had a partner at the firm that I worked at, or was it the firm I worked at or another firm? Anyway, I met this partner at a networking event, and she said about doc review that she had a very messy divorce play out while she worked at a law firm, and it ended up going in and needing discovery, and then her work emails ended up getting discovered, and then staff from her firm had to go through the emails because they were representing part of it. I can't remember if the litigation was actually about her divorce or something else, but young attorneys at her firm had to go through emails as part of doc review, which included reading all of these emails about her divorce with her ex-husband. And that she was like, so just don't use work email for private things. Just,
Yeah, it's really not that hard, because you can have them on the same phone.
Right.
There's lots of ways to keep yourself connected, but just really make a rule that you're not giving that out to people, unless it's about work.
Yeah.
So I think it's like social media. You have to assume that someone can see it at some point.
Social media is out there. Another good thing, because it can also come back to haunt you what you post on social media if you're talking about work, or if you've called in sick to work and then you're posting pictures of your vacation in Cabo, or the mistake I made, which I made a complaint about doing document review on my Facebook page, and my document review manager was one of my friends. Wouldn't recommend that.
Wow.
Oops. I mean, I backpedaled my way out of that. That was early Facebook days, to date myself. But still, I was like, maybe I shouldn't post about work. And I just made a blatant, like, I will not post like anything about my job on social media at that point ever again. But I think you have to be careful when you start working somewhere and people start adding you on social media, and you have to think about the audience,
I agree, and I think sometimes it's good just to make a blanket rule. I either am going to be friends with people at work, or not going to be friends with anyone at work. It's easier also, let's say that there's someone who tries to friend you, who's like a partner. You can just say like, oh, I don't really do social media with work people.
Right.
And I think that's totally acceptable and fine. Usually if someone's like senior to you, they probably wait for you to friend them anyway. But I do think, if you're going to have people at work, then you kind of have to keep it open, and you have to always, keep in mind that someone could read something, and I agree, like complaining or talking about something that really should be confidential. All of that can get you in trouble. I know someone told me about someone who was on disability for an injury and then posted a surfing picture of herself, which, may go beyond just work and into like, insurance fraud. But
that's bad. I feel like that's straight out of an episode of The Good Wife or something like that.
And it was true.
Yeah.
So I think all of that stuff, I agree, like everyone sometimes takes a, mental health day and stays at home. Don't post that you're at the beach getting a tan.
Right.
Not a good idea.
Yeah.
So I think just keep that in mind. But I also think that so many people are on social media and using it as a way to express themselves that, it's okay if you want work people on it.
Yeah, just remember your audience. I mean, it was that moment when everybody's like, parents and grandparents joined Facebook, and it like changed the social media experience for most people when they realized that, family members were watching their Facebook feeds. And, it's the same thing. If your boss is on your Facebook feed, remember the audience.
Yeah. And I also think people sometimes use different accounts, like on Facebook, they won't really post that stuff, but maybe they'll tweet about it or the other way around or whatnot.
Yeah, or use Instagram, and so you like have a lot more people on Facebook than you do on Instagram, things like that.
Exactly. Or just, talk to your friends about your issues. You don't need to.
That's a good point. Or just use messaging, group messaging. It's fantastic.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But not on your work messenger.
That's true. Not on your, yes. Use that cell phone you never put down. Use that to communicate with your friends.
Another thing just along that line, and just kind of, things that can get you in trouble. When you have email, and let's say you're forwarding something or replying to something or whatnot, everyone I think has a story about a mistake they've made along those lines.
Oh yes, I do. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I think that always keep that in mind. And I know the first time something like that happened to me, and I think there was a typo, and I sent it out to the whole firm. And it wasn't the end of the world, but I know it never happened again. Yeah. I even had other people check things when they were going to the whole firm. Or, you forward, you don't realize there's something on the bottom of the chain.
Yeah.
Always read through an email chain. I'm so careful about that.
Yeah. And I definitely have seen things where, somebody will write an email, let's say, saying something critical about a partner higher up, and there's two, like, say, associate level people talking, and then that chain eventually gets forwarded to the partner. Mm-hmm. Yeah, whoops, so you just have to be careful. Anything you put into email is just one of these things that you just have to keep in mind, that it could be forwarded to somebody else. I mean, it's the bummer about email. There's a trace, you can trace everything back to the written word. And so you just have to be conscious about that. And if you are going to say something critical in an email, just make sure that, maybe start a new chain, or, go old school. You can even, there's this thing called a telephone. It's probably on your desk. You have one on your body at all times. It also functions as a phone, but you actually have one on your desk too. And you can pick it up, and there are these numbers that you type, and you can call somebody and talk to them about the issue you're having with your door shut. And then there's no record of it. In fact, I just picked up the phone and called somebody on our team yesterday, and she was so surprised that I called her, and I'm like, I'm going old school because will be faster to deal with on the phone. And I realized how seldom I do that. But if it's something that you're worried...
Someone was saying that some people take it as a sign of aggression if you call someone.
Really?
Leave a voicemail.
Oh my gosh. I don't think.
Because they're so used to texting. But I agree. Sometimes a phone call also is easier and quicker and better.
Yeah. Sometimes it can be, if you're brainstorming a solution, or you have a technical problem, or sometimes, this always happens with email communications, it just gets confusing, and a 2-second phone call can solve the confusion, but you could email back and forth, 1,000 times.
And tone and things like that. The other thing that I think you can turn off, and I think people have trouble with, is I think it's mostly in Outlook where something gets auto-populated.
Oh, yeah.
When you're typing in someone's name and the wrong name goes in. That's
true.
That's something to be super careful about. A lot of people have similar names.
Yes. Or say... my husband's name and somebody I work with are the same. And if you're using one email account and you're writing emails to your husband, and then accidentally you're writing husband emails to somebody else, I have not done this, but it's definitely wrongly populated the name before. And you're like, oops, delete.
Yeah, exactly.
Super
it's just easy to get yourself in trouble.
It is. Well, given the current political environment, I guess is what you'd call it, I definitely think we need to just take a second to talk about sexual misconduct and sexual harassment allegations that can happen in the workplace. I think this is such a difficult thing to talk about because, with the #MeToo social media campaign, I think most women would all say that at one time or another, something inappropriate has happened to them at the workplace or outside of the workplace. And, how do you make sure that you're steering clear of those pitfalls? Again, when the lines between work and social life can start to become somewhat blurred, when you are partying together or traveling together, spending all your time together, working late together. So I do think that it's a good idea to really be conscious about your actions. Make sure that you are careful if you're considering entering into a romantic relationship with somebody at the office, because that can create sticky situations, especially if it does go south. I know people who married out of the firm. I'm sure that you do too. Mm-hmm. But you want to just be thoughtful and careful that your actions, hopefully won't be taken another way. This doesn't mean that you don't want to connect with people and interact with them. But, I think the situations that we're hearing a lot in the news right now are things that most people would be like, yeah, that's pretty messed up. You should never do that at work. So, hopefully nobody listening to this podcast would ever consider doing any of the things we're hearing on the news right now. But I do think it's just important to be very conscious about, interaction that could be, taken poorly. We don't.
And I think I would just really consider it before you're starting to date someone at work. I think you have to think is this worth it? Because what will it be like if this doesn't last? I'll have to see the person every day. I don't know if they, are in a position where they're more senior to you or you're more senior to them, which is a whole other issue. And I think you're going out with people, like you said. I think keeping the drinking in check and doing things that maybe you will regret, doing them with people at work is definitely a bigger consequence than, with someone you wouldn't have to see every day. So I would keep that in mind. I also think from an HR perspective, especially at law firms, I don't know if people feel comfortable, reporting incidents, but I do know that HR absolutely takes them seriously. And, hopefully there's somebody at the firm you feel comfortable with.
Yeah.
I've worked at places where aside from HR, there's a partner who you can go to with anonymous stuff. And usually they pick someone who's easy to talk to and everyone likes,
Right.
And all that kind of stuff. And I think, again, because of the hierarchy, some people don't feel comfortable.
Yeah.
Because maybe that person is, a rainmaker, very senior, has been around a long time, but the firm wants to know if there's an issue. They don't want it to turn into a lawsuit. They want to know what's going on.
Yeah. And you wouldn't deserve to suffer in silence. So you should be able to talk about what's happening to you in the workplace if it's inappropriate. But
exactly.
I think it's something that now is very openly being discussed, which I think is a great thing because I think it will make people feel hopefully a little more sensitive to what their actions could be perceived at, but also so folks feel like that they can go and utilize the resources at their workplace if they need to. But just be cautious and careful. And I think dating in the workplace is just one of those things that can go south and maybe create some awkward situations.
Yeah, absolutely. I would really, think about the consequences of your action.
Yeah. One thing I will link to in the show notes is Alison did a post a few years back about sexual harassment in some of the firms that she was a part of that I think would be interesting to read for folks that are more interested in this topic. It's probably not the last time we're going to mention this on the podcast, but we did just want to bring it up because it is something that is very current and I think very important to everybody. I know, especially as a women-owned business, we feel like women should be able to be in the workplace without being sexually harassed. I realize it happens to men too, but I feel like most of the stories coming out are that that women are being sexually harassed. So there's that. Okay, so what about some final tips? What do you think are kind of the most important things for folks to remember when they're thinking about their persona at work?
I think, treat people how you want to be treated.
Yeah.
Kind of the golden rule. And I think, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be yourself. You should be yourself. You should be honest. You don't need to be, just like everybody else or doing the right thing all the time. We all say things, that we didn't mean to say. I think being able to apologize is also really helpful, if you do make a mistake, because obviously, it can be hard to always be on your best behavior.
Yeah.
But I think, so especially when you're a summer associate, just keep in mind that every day you're there is a job interview. And I know that can be hard and that it's, it's a long job interview, but, this is potentially a job you could have for a long time. It's a high salary. They expect a lot out of you. They really want to know, that you can handle it. Yeah. And treat people with respect. And then if you're a junior associate, I think, know that there are people that know more than you and, that you can learn from them. So, I think just be kind, be courteous, be somebody that, like you said, the secretary they're talking about and saying like, oh, don't you really like that person?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's what I would keep in mind, you know?
Yeah. And that your legal reputation is really starting, you know, in law school with your summer positions, with your early associate positions. Like, you're creating the reputation that you're going to have through the rest of your legal career. And oftentimes people stay in one location for a really long time. And so, you know, that's not uncommon for people to have known each other for 20 or 30 years in the same profession. So I think that's important to keep in mind too. You know, you can be authentic, but be nice and authentic because that's how you want people to remember you. And one thing that we were talking about before the podcast that I think is important to mention is also what to do with politics in the workplace. Because I think we keep going back to this current political environment, but politics in the workplace is a bit of a powder keg right now. I think we're in a very divided country. I think we can all appreciate that. And so when you are a young associate or a summer associate, really, or higher up, you want to be very careful about talking politics with folks until you figure out the lay of the land, because you should never assume that you know someone else's politics just based on where they live or their gender or whatever it might be. Yeah. And you don't want to misstep by offending someone or having folks, you know, make judgment calls based on your own political beliefs. So probably something to play a little bit close to the vest until you know, somebody higher up than you mentions something and you decide to agree with them. That's one thing, but maybe don't come in and say, hey, did you hear the indictments just came down from Mueller? Like, that's probably, you know, unless you are 100% sure that the person that you're talking to was also listening
agrees with you,
was listening to Pod Saves America and they were just talking about it or whatever it might be. So just be cautious, because I think leading into these large national campaigns of 2018 and 2020, there's going to be a lot of political stuff that's going to be very charged happening in the world. And you just want to make sure that that doesn't change how people perceive you in the workplace. It doesn't mean that you should, you know, kind of eat disrespectful things or things like that, but just think about kind of how you're presenting your political viewpoints and whether or not it's the appropriate place to do that.
Well, and I also think in places like San Francisco, or a place that, you know, is very liberal, some people do have a tendency to just think everyone thinks exactly the way they do. Yeah. And, you know, that's not necessarily the case. So I also think there's a way to say how you feel and not be disrespectful to the other side.
True.
You know, not just assume like, because I think this, it's right. Or it's the only way. You know, there is a way to kind of be like, this is what I support, but you're still open if someone says, you know, they have different political views.
Yeah.
And it goes with like religion, all those like hot button issues.
It's good to talk about travel. It's good to talk about, you know, what you ate for lunch. What's your favorite food? Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, with that, we are out of time. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on iTunes. We'd really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Alison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. I just answered a few listener questions today, so believe me, we really write back. I promise. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.